Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is absolutely a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. This is my first visit in this part of the world. So, again, thank you for all your hospitality. So we're going to talk a little bit about emerging technologies, and I'm going to relate it back to Florida Virtual School and your world as we go today. But I want to take you back first to about 1996. 1996 was when Florida Virtual School actually started. My first day of work was December 2nd, 1996. So we're currently in our 15th year. And I always tell people that back then I did really have brown hair. It's been a long time, but it has been a journey and a ride of a lifetime. If you think about 1996, that was the year Nintendo 64 was released for the very first time in Japan. It was also the year that 16 megabytes of RAM was a really big deal. If you follow our TV the way that we follow your royalty, although very different analogy, O.J. Simpson's trial started in 1996. And probably one of the most memorable things about 1996 is the fact that that was the year that the very first Palm Pilot was launched. How many of you had one? Did you get one right away? I bought one on a Saturday. I followed all the directions. I wrapped it back up, and I took it back on a Saturday. So anyway, but if we think about 1996 and where we've come since then, we were on dial-up, and we were developing our courses at the time for dial-up. Florida Virtual School, in a nutshell, is a statewide public virtual school serving the entire state of Florida that was actually implemented by our legislature. We are 24/7, 365 days a year. Students can enroll any day of the year. Teachers have kids in all different places, and our teachers are available 7 days a week to students by cell, by email, by instant messenger. We call ourselves high touch as well as high tech, and our motto is anytime, any place, any path, any pace. The entire goal from day one was to put the student at the center of the learning experience and design a system that was based on their needs versus adult schedules. So it's a very different setup, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. We currently have about 120,000 active Florida students taking 1, 2, or 3 courses, and about 4,000 full-time students and a staff of 1,600. So that gives you a little backdrop of what I do on a daily basis. So currently, there's about 7 billion people in the world today, and there's 5.2 billion of those people that are cell phone subscribers. Now, in the year 2000, that 5.2 billion was only 400 million. So it's grown absolutely, outrageously, dramatically, right, over the years. One of the most interesting points now is that 20% of the data consumption today is being used, is coming from those tablets on your lap, the new tablets that everyone has. They haven't even been around that long, but 20% of the data consumption is already being used by those tablets. So think about the implications as it relates to education and to your students. Now, we actually surveyed 35,000 of our students this last year, and out of those 35,000 students, 67% of them have cell phones of some type. I think we determined about 35% were smartphones. 73% of the students surveyed said they had some kind of a device like an MP3 player or an iPod or certainly the cell phone. So if you think again about the student usage, that high of a percentage of the students actually have those devices, again, we need to be thinking about how that's going to affect how we design and prepare for education in the future. Right now what we do in many schools is we say, leave the cell phone in your backpack, leave the cell phone in your locker, or leave the cell phone at home, right? So think about that a little bit as we go. 2004, February, another landmark time in history. That was when Facebook launched. Who would have ever thought that Facebook and social media would have the impact that it has had on our world and our society? Even think about advertising. Many companies now no longer use any type of print advertising at all. Everything's done via the web and via Facebook. Most businesses all have Facebook pages. We're challenged with that in the education space because sometimes we don't do smart things with our Facebook page. And so we, again, are trying to figure out how to minimize and limit how educators use Facebook. Some schools have policies that say that they absolutely cannot use Facebook with a student. Try to control that. Try to monitor that. You don't find out until there's a problem. So how do we get ourselves in a frame of reference of how do we work with this trend rather than fight it every step of the way? So 40% of those 35,000 students actually told us that they use mobile apps to test prep at the last minute before they take a test. Now, our students actually have access to 9 mobile apps that we've created. We actually now, with every new development, every new course, there's a mobile app as well as a mobile presence. And so when we have our end-of-course exams, we actually have apps that are for Algebra 1, Geometry, and Biology, which is what we're testing now, where kids can go in and they can actually go through and do some drill and some study and some last-minute prep. So 40% we thought was pretty high because we've only had the apps for a year. So again, think about where they're studying and where they want to spend their time. They're doing it in the car. The parents say they love it. If it was on paper, they would not be doing it in the car. They would be not doing it, probably, or they would be doing it begrudgingly. Interesting thoughts. Now, what we believe is going to be one of the greatest new game-changing technologies is augmented reality. Now, what is augmented reality? It's basically 3D technology that allows you to kind of lay over information, add to it. There are already many devices out right now that have 3D technology. Last year, the HTC Evo offers a 3D tool. It's kind of weird when you look at it. It kind of makes me have, like a queasy stomach. Not for me. But augmented reality is going to start to, again, change the content and change the way that we learn. How many of you have ever heard of an application called Layers, or actually use it or have it on your phone? Anybody? I feel like Ferris Bueller. Anybody? Okay, well, it is an amazing piece of technology. It was developed by a company out of India, and we're going to take just a quick peek at a video to share with you this technology.
Layer is a platform where everybody can create their own fantastic augmented reality experiences.
Augmented reality is a new mass medium. It's where the real world is combined with digital information.
We're going to bring these digital experiences into reality. You're going to engage into reality with this new medium.
Today, with Layer, you can experience history, art,
ATM finder, real estate for sale, how things looked 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Foursquare, Twitter, tourism, sports, commerce, gaming, social. Gaming in augmented reality is a completely new genre. Interacting with objects right in front of you. We got crazy shit on there.
It's you moving around, experiencing it. Whatever you want to see, it's all in there, in Layer. One of the best things about augmented reality is that you can create anything. You can make your own world.
There are no barriers. There are no limits to what is possible when your reality is your canvas. The medium is really in its infancy. We're only getting started. We're in the 1994 of the internet. We're at the moment when radio became TV.
The future of Layer is Right. I see a future in which augmented reality has a very prominent place in everyday life. It's exciting. You know, it's every day at Layer we get one step closer to realizing our dream. And every day it brings more confidence that we're on the right track.
With Layer, we want to bring impactful augmented reality into the everyday life of people.
There's another video for Layer that actually shows how you take your cell phone, your smartphone, you hold it up to a building, like a hotel, and it'll actually show you which rooms are vacant. And so it kind of shows somebody who's going, oh, you know, I don't have a hotel yet. Let me look at this one. Oh, there's one next to it. Maybe this one. Ooh, I like that room. It's really fascinating. Did you catch the part where they're driving down the road and the person was holding the video up and it showed you what the that particular area looked like 100 years ago? I mean, how fascinating is that? How amazing would that be for educational purposes when we think about how we learn about the past with our kids now? And it all would be connected into how they want to learn. So how many of you have one of these? Actually, how many of you don't have one of these? Okay, you don't have it in your car and you don't have it on your phone. Okay, all right. What's interesting is I remember when I got my first GPS, it was after I got lost in Miami and had a complete crying fit and went home, and my husband felt so bad that I said, I'll never buy another car without a GPS. And I got my first GPS. But now our GPSs are on our phones, and we can not only figure out how to get places, but we can also track where our kids are at any time. They could track where we are at any time. I've found myself walking down the street in some city and not really knowing where I'm going, and I type it in right on my cell phone, and I can just follow it down the path to get where I want while I'm walking. A GPS has just become part of our normal life. My husband and I boat, and last weekend we got stuck, and we called, this is the ultimate man thing, you know, it's the worst thing ever to happen to a man is to either get lost or for their boat to break. And so we're out there, and after an hour, it's kind of like, okay, we have to call the tow service. So we called the tow service, and Bruce is trying to describe where we are out on the water, and the guy can't get it. He's having trouble. And finally he goes, don't you have a GPS on your boat? And Bruce says, no, I don't have a GPS on my boat. He says, dude, you need to get a GPS if you're going to boat. And he was like, people have been boating for hundreds of years. I don't have a GPS. Just find me. So anyway, I took my phone and I said, now we have a GPS. Here's the latitude. Here's where we are. He called him back and he gave him the coordinates because it was as easy as me going to the market and downloading a boating GPS. It was right there free of charge. But when we think about how these things have changed our lives, I want to take you back to how many of you have a 4S iPhone? How many of you have a smartphone? Okay, everybody pretty much. I have an Android. How many of you have an iPhone? Okay, and very few of you raised that you had the 4S, right? 4S? How many of you have 4S envy? For the very first time, I have iPhone envy. But my kids have an iPhone 4S, of course. And they spent 3 days just walking around asking Siri questions. And sometimes Siri would, at one point, I can't remember where they asked, but Siri said, I don't know you well enough to answer that question. So think about this, okay? Now think about Yahoo Answers is something we deal with all the time. And with all our Google alerts, we actually have a pretty sophisticated academic integrity department, and we have someone who's watching that all the time. But with Yahoo Answers, you at least have to type in the question to get your answer. Now with Siri, who you carry around in your pocket, you know, you just say, what was the 32nd president? Who was the 32nd president? And Siri will just answer you. Okay, so we are going to, what are we doing now? Now we're saying leave them in your pocket, leave them in your backpack, leave them in your locker, leave them at home. How are we going to incorporate these devices into learning rather than try to keep them out of learning? Just the introduction of Siri has changed the world and the face of education. There was always Cha-Cha, but you had to dial a number. There's always Yahoo Answers, but you had to type it in. Now all you got to do is pull it out of your pocket and go, who is the 32nd president? If somebody's not watching. Think about how that changes our life. So today's prototypes. The stuff we've been talking about is just stuff. Let's talk about what's on the horizon. Biometric ID technology actually is a technology that uses a scan in your smartphone that allows short distance communications. So for example, when you have your phone and it's activated with a biometric ID, it knows that you are in possession of it. It knows that your phone is on your person. So when you think about cars and car keys and keyless entries, you still now have to have some type of a little device. Well, now you could just literally walk up to your car with the biometric ID and say, open. Car would open, get in your car and say, start. Car would start. Smartphone knows it's you. So again, imagine the implications. I mean, we think it's pretty cool we can scan our boarding pass now. But imagine if you just walked up and it knew, think how much faster it would go when you wanted to get through security. It would just know it was you. Think about a student who loses their lunch ticket on a daily basis, who now no longer has to have a lunch ticket because they have a smartphone in their pocket that has a biometric ID, and they just walk through the line. They don't even need a lunchroom lady anymore, standing there taking the tickets because of the biometric ID. These are computers. So imagine you get up tomorrow and you say, I wonder which computer I'll wear today. The contact lens computer actually has the capability of laying in kind of a 3D fashion different information over your eye without interrupting your vision so that you can see additional things. Now, I just think that's the weirdest thing in the world, and I'm trying to figure out how in the world it's not going to interrupt my vision, especially listening to the speaker talking about the spots in his eyes. That's all I can think about. But if we think about looking at a computer, but this contact lens is in our eye, rather than looking at a computer here, we're just going to see what we would see here from here. Did any of you see the movie The Minority Report? Okay, so you remember Tom Cruise when he's doing all that stuff on the glass, and he's moving everything around? Well, that's just passé now. That exists. So what they're now experimenting with is there will be no more glass. It'll just be your hands. And then based on what you have in your eye, you'll be able to see whatever it is that you would have been moving on the glass and seeing previously. Weird, huh? And the bottom left is a bracelet that's a computer that's actually being worked on out in California. So the bracelet is designed in such a way that you can either take it off and lay it out, like the picture on the right, or you can actually tap on it and a hologram of a keyboard will just, you'll be able to look down and see it. And then you'll be able to touch it, so to speak, and activate your social networking sites, your email, your internet, what have you. But it's on a bracelet. So think about how all these technologies that are not far away are going to, again, affect how we learn and how we teach and how we interact with each other. They're even talking about screenless cell phones. That seems really weird. So we've been talking about devices, and we've been talking about computers as different kinds of devices. But imagine if your brain was such that you think of a number and your phone dials it.
Emotiv is a neuroengineering company. We have developed a brain-computer interface that utterly transforms the way in which humans can interact with machines. The way that Emotiv has created its detection suites is based on the way in which humans interact with each other. So we have three categories of detections: expressive, affective, and cognitive. Expressive is all about understanding your facial expressions. An avatar, when you smile, it can actually understand that you're smiling and express that. And what that does, it allows your expressions in a virtual environment to become far more intuitive, far more natural and personal, and ultimately more lifelike. The next detection suite that we have is affective, which is all about understanding your emotional experience. And really the most powerful aspect of this detection is to be able to adjust the game dynamically to your personal experience. Music and sound, intensity of the music and the colors in the game, the mood can change based on your emotional experience. And lastly, cognitive is all about fulfilling mankind's longest and oldest fantasies. And that's the ability for you to be able to control objects just by simply thinking about it. People that purchase their Epoch will also have access to a next generation online portal that will allow you to experience your own content that you have today in a totally different way. Your music will be able to vary based on your emotional experience. Your photos will actually change and reorganize itself based on what you feel. In addition to that, Immortal is the avenue and the gateway for you to download additional content that is available with the Emotiv Neuro headset. The Emotiv Epoch Neuro headset will also be bundled with a software called Emotiv that will allow the end user to be able to attach the emotive detections into any of your existing PC games. So instead of pressing a button to cast a spell, you can now just simply think about it and be able to see that happen in the game.
I don't know about you, but that stuff's scary. But I want to conclude just with the thought about how all of this relates to learning, and how do we think about the talent of each and every child. One of the things that we do see at Florida Virtual School, by the design of the environment, is we are able to personalize and to customize an educational experience for that child in a very different way. Kids who have struggled and have been behind for years find themselves catching up because they're really not behind when they can move at a pace that's conducive to their learning, and they don't have to stop learning on May 30th and fail and take it again next year, because they can continue on to August 1st if they need to in order to pass Algebra 1. As we think about the diversity of our students, we should be thinking a lot about diversity in our learning and how the tools that they use and the tools that are available can help us, not control us, but help us as we engage our kids. What we do know is kids will leave to go find learning in another place, and they've demonstrated that, I think, all over the world where they have choices. So our goal is try to embrace the new technologies, bring them into the classroom for the betterment of a student experience. And so with that, I will stop. And actually, I think we're going to do some questions and answers. So thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes or so for a couple of questions. So if you could just indicate that you have a question for Julie, we'll try and get a microphone to you as soon as we possibly can. Stunned. I thought one of the questions might be, can we get a set of those headsets for our classes? Do we have someone at the back there for number 4? Yes. Could you just stand up, please, sir, so we could just see?
I'll try to disentangle myself from computers. I was just wondering how you handle getting innovative new technologies like you've been presenting. What's the sort of testing process you use to get them from an interesting concept to something that could actually work in a school?
That's a great idea, or a great question. We work a lot directly with the entrepreneurs or the developers of companies, and at this point in time, they'll come to us and say, hey, we have this new technology, we'd like you to test it, or we'd like you to help us evolve it. So, for example, right now we're working with a company called UCompass on what he calls injectable tools into the content. So we are, as he develops a component, then we apply it to a small percentage of our courses and to students, and then we test it along with their involvement all the way. In addition, with some of the mobile technologies, sometimes we'll just put out an all-call that to people that we know, that we say, we want to be able to do this with the technology. And then if they're interested and they bite, they'll come in, we'll share, we'll talk, and then they'll develop a prototype.
Anyone else? Julie, we did have, yesterday we had a speaker, and I won't mention the name of the speaker, but the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned that one of his reflections was that the classrooms of 100 years ago, when compared to the classrooms of today, really just haven't changed at all. And it was implied that this possibly was a criticism of the education system not adopting and adapting quickly enough to new technologies. Do you feel that the classrooms of today need to look significantly different to the classrooms of yesterday, given the technologies you've just been talking about?
You know, I don't know how different they need to look than how they looked 100 years ago. They're a room, they have desks, they have a teacher. When we go into classrooms that are energetic now, we actually do blended models as well, which means that we use our courses in classrooms on the ground. Most of what we do is at a distance, but in a blended model, as for example, we have one in Miami-Dade called iPrep Academy. When you walk into the room, they're using our courses, our content, our teachers are teaching them from all over the state, but they're in a physical location. It looks very much like a Starbucks cafe. When you walk in, there's couches, there's beanbag chairs, there's big screen TVs, there's a foosball table in the other room. Their PE is done in a gym-like fashion, so when you go into another area, there are bikes and elliptical machines, and again, they have TV screens over them. They can actually work on some of their coursework while they're on the machine. You know, I like to watch NCIS. They're doing their chemistry. So I think it's a matter of what we're doing in that space. And one of the things that we always say is we don't believe that virtual education is going to replace traditional education. We believe it's going to change it. And what kids tell us is they want to be able to do some stuff at school where they can have an interaction and discuss and have a teacher right there for them, but they want to do some other stuff completely at a distance. And typically that's if they are accelerating or they're struggling. If they're struggling, all of a sudden they have they're a classroom of one, and they can ask any question they want without a peer hearing them or laughing at them. And so they probe, and they actually become a different person. We say kids will reinvent themselves in that environment. So a student who's a behavior problem at school might be one of our best students because they have a teacher who's really caring about them probing, and they're starting to learn. So we think that school buildings are not going to house every student every day. We think it will house some students every day because that's the only place they eat. But we also believe that there will be kids who come and go, and that schools will look much more like community centers, and we're already starting to see that evolution.
Thank you. I think we have a question here at the front.
Hiya. Thinking about that headset you were talking about that's almost out of date when you consider that the chip that the University of Florida is developing,
Yep.
Just because we can, does that mean we should? Where do you stand on the ethics of it?
I think that stuff's weird. That's what I said earlier. We used that headset technology when we did game development, and so we used that headset technology to kind of guide our development. I think that, when you get into an ethics conversation about should your mind be able to control your others and device actions, I think that's a very personal kind of an opinion. I struggle with the depth of it, and I also know that it's coming fast and furiously. So as we try again to keep things out of our environments, one of the things that we are trying to do is look for ways to accept it, but use it in a fashion that's meaningful, if that answers your question. Okay.
Great. I think probably we may need to move on, but can you join me please in thanking Julie? And I thought that was wonderful. Just mind-blowing, actually.